Well, I wish you all a good evening, and I just said I wanted to introduce myself a little bit. Background about myself. So my name is Adam. I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York. For those of you not so familiar with New York, there's Brooklyn. Do I got a shout out? Whoa, all right. Yeah, so born and raised in Brooklyn. That's where I did my bachelor's in psychology. And during my bachelor's, I actually spent some time here in Amsterdam studying psychology as well. I went back home to finish my bachelor's, and I had been bitten by the Amsterdam bug. So I went back to Brooklyn, and I said, see you later, forget about it. I'm going back to Amsterdam. I did my research master's in psychology, where I specialized in social psychology. And now for the last 2 years, I've been a PhD candidate at the developmental psychopathology department at the BSI at the Radboud University in Nijmegen. And that's where I study the positive effects of video games for social and emotional development in children and adolescents. So I'm a social psychologist. I'm a researcher. I'm hearing woos. I mean, this is my first nerd night, so I was just kind of mingling about a bit, and I thought, ooh, like soft scientist, oh shit. But I do have some nerd credentials. I'm a gamer, and that's what you're here to talk, that's what you came here to hear about, right? So that's me playing video games from a young age till today. These are some of my favorite games, if I've got some fellow gamers out in the audience. Great. And tonight, what I'm here to talk about is actually how it is that we deal with stress in our everyday lives, and how we can actually draw parallels between the way we deal with stress in a video game context to how we deal with it in an everyday context. That's what my talk is all about. And in order to do this, what I first want to do is I want to describe what happens when people are experiencing anxiety and how we help people overcome their anxiety and how we can do that better. And from there, I want to talk about how it is that we can talk about anxiety in the context of video games. And I want to then describe a study that I did using a video game called StarCraft. If you've never heard of it, don't worry, I'll explain plenty about it. And then I want to talk about how that study can inform us for how we can design games in the future to help people that do experience anxiety. So my colleagues and I have something of a vision. If we just look at the numbers in the States, about 20% of people each year are diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. And over the course of their lives, about 30% of Americans will be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. Now, anxiety disorders look like this. They're characterized by intense worry about catastrophic future events or intense fear for things that are generally that shouldn't be so fearful. And they're accompanied by these physiological symptoms of your heart pounding and propensity to getting panic attacks. And they're also characterized by people being very avoidant. So they avoid these situations that they think will cause extreme worry and concern for them. And anxiety disorders are also potentially a root cause for other disorders such as depression, as people that have anxiety disorders become very likely for getting things like depression and bipolar disorder. Now, I think I kind of gave it away a little bit, but I wanted to ask you guys, just to have an idea, at what age do you think the average, what do you think the average age is for people to be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder? And for those who got the peak, just, can I get some ideas? 30? It's actually 11 years old is the average age of onset. So these symptoms start to manifest themselves from a very young age, and they persist. That's all right. Yeah, so these problems emerge from a very young age, and just looking at the numbers, they last for a very long time unless they go treated. But fortunately, psychology has developed a very good way of treating something called cognitive behavioral therapy. And in cognitive behavioral therapy, we train these children and adolescents to deal with these problems by A, progressively becoming more and more exposed to the things that really shouldn't be scaring them, and B, learning to rethink their situations in order to turn a negative thought into a positive thought. So there's great success rates when we talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, but unfortunately there are a large number of barriers for people to be getting treatment. These include cost. It's obviously very costly for the individual, but also on a societal level for people for therapy to be made widely available. Reach is also a difficulty for people that are living very far away from centers where they can be treated. Stigma, even though we live in a modern age, people going to see a therapist is not something that you just want to share with people around the coffee table. And finally, during these sessions, what children and adolescents are basically being given to work through their anxiety can often be very tedious homework assignments. Here's a negative thought. Try to think it over again in a better way, ad nauseum. So in our vision, we think that developing video games for mental health can actually can actually overcome all these barriers. Specifically, video games involve one-time costs. You develop a game, it's out, you can distribute it widely, so that overcomes the reach issue. Video games are popular, everybody likes video games. So there's far less stigma attached to playing a video game for mental health. And instead of being boring and tedious, video games, if designed well, are highly engaging. Now, in order to realize this vision, I need to talk a little bit more about emotion regulation. Emotion regulation refers to the automatic and controlled processes that monitor and influence emotion experiences. Now, psychologists are really good at coming up with really complicated definitions for very simple things. All this means is emotion regulation refers to how it is that you control or change your emotions. It could be that you go home and you read a book, you post something to 4chan, or you go play a video game. These are all different ways of dealing with emotions. Perhaps when you watch a scary movie, you close your eyes. Now, when people talk about the way in which video games fit into the way that people regulate their emotions, they tend to think, well, if I'm feeling really bad emotions, I turn on the video game, it distracts me, and I'm really happy. Heck, video games are really fun. But in our approach, we want to look at video games from another perspective. That is, video games are actually a really stressful experience. Who here agrees with me? Yeah, wow, okay, fantastic. I mean, they're hard when they're designed well. And while there's a lot of research that looks at the positive emotions that we experience during games, there's also a good amount of research that shows that while people are playing, they are really stressed out. We know this from questionnaires, we know this from looking at their heart rate while they play the game, and we know this by measuring their facial expressions during gameplay. So we became really interested in this idea of trying to relate how it is that we experience and deal with stress in an everyday context with how it is that we experience and deal with stress in a video game context. And so we thought to ourselves, what might be like an underlying skill that exists in both domains? And the answer to that question, we believe, is something called interoceptive awareness. Another complicated term for something very simple. Interoceptive awareness refers to the conscious perception of one's physiological state. So it simply means the awareness to which you're able to tell, am I hungry? Am I sleepy? Do I have an itch on my arm? Anything that has to do with how we are feeling internally is the ability to be able to discern what that is refers to interoceptive awareness. And interoceptive awareness is a really important skill for being able to manage our stress for a number of reasons. First of all, since pretty much the dawn of modern psychology, theorists and experiments have demonstrated that emotions are inherently tied to our physiology. So the signals that our body is sending us, just like in this image over here, will directly relate to what it is that we're exactly feeling. If we're breathing really fast in a certain way, our face is feeling really red, your brain is saying you are angry. It's being derived from this physiological experience. And because of this coupling between the physiology and our emotions, there have been researchers and studies that have been done to show that the better aware I am at what my body is telling me, then the better equipped I am to try to resolve those negative emotions, to overcome them in a difficult situation. So we decided to conduct a study where we wanted to kind of test this idea out. And specifically what we wanted to look at is our question was, are people who are better at recognizing and feeling that negative sense of arousal, that stressful sense of emotion while they play video games, are these people also going to be better at dealing with their negative emotions in their everyday lives? Enter StarCraft 2, the video game that has been called chess on steroids. Now, for the long-standing nerd-nighters, who are the loyal ones, you may remember from about a year ago, somebody gave a talk about StarCraft, where he gave a really good explanation as to why a video game like StarCraft is so stressful. For those of you who missed it, don't worry, I got you covered. StarCraft is something called a real-time strategy game. That means that it's a game where you need to enact strategy to overcome your opponent, but everything is being conducted in real time. So there are at least 3 reasons why these types of games are highly stressful. If we think about a game like chess. This is a strategy game. Chess is a game that isn't actually being played in real time. I take a turn, my opponent takes a turn. I take a turn, my opponent takes a turn. In a game like StarCraft, all of the actions are being done in real time. So you're playing like this. In chess, I'm able to see what my opponent is doing. So I can kind of maybe glean an idea of what his or her strategy might be, right? But in StarCraft 2, my visibility is limited by what it is that I control on the map. And controlling things on the map requires me to, exert certain dominance and, have enough resources in order to have visibility of things. Further, in StarCraft 2, the player is forced with making cost-benefit choices at each point in the game. Now, these cost-benefit choices are somewhat being made in a vacuum, right? You can't necessarily decide what the best strategy is to do unless you know what your opponent is doing. So at every stage of the game, you're questioning, am I moving fast enough? Am I choosing the right strategy? And how can I figure out what the best strategy is actually going to be? Really stressful experience. So this is what the study looked like. We put out an open petition for participants to come to our study. We got 26 volunteers, all of whom were male. Don't know why. We essentially had them first answer questions about how they deal with their negative emotions in everyday contexts, and then we brought them into the lab to get a sense of their interoceptive awareness while playing StarCraft 2. So the way that this looked is essentially we had them come in, play a ladder match as if they were in their own home, only we first, during the game, measured objectively how much stress they were experiencing during the game. So we did this by measuring their heart rate. You can see that over here. Then immediately following the game, we had them watch the game they had just played from their perspective and rate with a dial how much stress they think they were feeling at every given moment of the game. Now, all players were told that they were going to have to do this beforehand, so this wasn't like a surprise thing. They were all told, hey, I'm going to test you to see how good you are at realizing when you're stressed and when you're not. So in order to then calculate interoceptive awareness, we simply compared these two measures. We compared the objective measure of their stress with the subjective measure that they gave right afterwards. And so essentially, after one session, for each participant, what we're getting is two lines, two time series, one reflecting their heart rate and one reflecting their dial. And that looks like this. So this is one participant. This is an example of a participant that shows a high level of interoceptive awareness. And I can demonstrate very quickly why that is. So if we follow the blue line, the heart rate line, we can see that virtually almost all the times where there's an increase in the relative amount of arousal, this is being matched on the red line pretty well. So here there's an increase, here there's an increase, here there's a dip. If we look over here, we see as well. We see a peak over here, a dip, and a peak. This is a participant who shows a high level of interoceptive awareness. And what I want to do now is actually want to zoom in on about 50 seconds. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the game, can get a sense of what it looks like and why it's so stressful. And you can also see more or less like what's actually happening to a player. So over here you see one of our participants. For those of you who think maybe it's not a stressful game, just stare at his face. What you're about to see now is this player is going to advance down this way on the map with three types of units. The first type of unit is these tanks over here. The second type is these foot soldiers over here. And there's a third type that you don't see quite yet, but it's a flying unit, which is going to provide medical aid to the soldiers as they take damage. All right, 50 seconds.
Go, go, go!
So he advances in on his opponent. He decides to siege up his tanks. He puts his tanks into siege mode, he advances, he doesn't know what his opponent is up to, he does a scan, he sees that his opponent is waiting, he decides to advance, the tank is attacking him, he decides to get in a position, is he going to engage, he decides to engage, they exchange fire, he destroys the tank, he decides to retreat, then his tank fires back on the enemy forces that pursued them, he sees that his enemy is waiting, so he decides, okay, I'm going to advance. He decides to advance while he's healing up, he takes his tanks, he comes even further up the map, puts them into supporting position, he decides, okay, I'm climbing this ramp, I'm doing this. Now they're exchanging fire, they're able to see each other, he's taking fire from the side by this other tank, and yeah, there's just he decides to retreat, this isn't working out so well. The guy comes in, his tanks start mauling the other guys, and what we've just basically witnessed is a whitewash. They've pretty much wiped each other's forces out, and they're back to square one, gotta figure out, okay, how am I gonna come over my opponent? That's 50 seconds, people. That's 50 seconds, okay? I'm stressed out. So we saw what somebody that has high level of interoceptive awareness looks like. Now let's just take a quick look at what somebody looks like when they have a low interoceptive awareness. Ooh, look at that. Oh, I'm stressed. Nothing. So what did we find? Just before I dive into that, just so it's really clear, the idea was we wanted to, for each participant, give them a score on how well they were aware of this negative stress during the game. And then we were expecting that the better they were at this, then the more likely they would be to enact healthy responses to stress in their everyday lives. So what do we observe? Well, the first thing that we saw is we saw a positive association between this skill and actually deciding to tackle a problem. Did I mention I was American? This is football. No, I'm kidding. So essentially, this is a skill where when people say, okay, there's this block in my life, this is a really stressful thing, instead of running away from it, I'm going to try to take it head on. I'm going to engage the problem, I'm going to see what steps I need to take to overcome it, and that's what I'm going to do. A healthy response to stress. This was our main finding. We also saw less convincing level of results, so I don't want to talk in terms of p-values, as I've been discouraged, but there was signs within the study. There's also, the more aware they were of their internal levels of stress, the less likely they were to say that, okay, when I have a negative event in my life, I'm going to run away. Can we make a Nerd Night rule that every presentation has Monty Python references in it? Okay, good. Okay, so now what does this tell us about the future? What does it tell us about game design, right? I mean, it's really interesting, right? We see that the way that people can feel the amount of stress they have in one context actually informs us a little bit about how they deal with stress in other contexts. Really interesting. So let's go back to that vision. Now let's imagine now that you had a game that was able to detect how fearful you are of things in the real life. And let's imagine that this game was able to then reward you for overcoming them in really healthy ways. What would a game like that look like? I have an answer. This is a game called Nite. We're currently testing it in children that show high levels of stress. This is actually a beta version, so it looks better. When they play the game, children wear this headset, which is able to measure how relaxed they are while playing. The more relaxed they are, the brighter their light shines. They have to navigate a haunted house environment. They have to scare monsters away with their light and solve puzzles that are based on experimentally tested designs that show that they can lower their anxiety. When they encounter things in the environment that look really scary, they're encouraged to approach them. Relax, shine your light, and you'll see it's not so scary. So just for time's sake, I'm gonna kind of skip on through. Sorry for all you Flaming Lips fans. With this way of thinking, we really want to just strongly encourage more games like this to be developed and more people to start thinking about games as a context for people to not only be experiencing stress, but learning how it is that they can overcome it. Thank you all for your attention. And I also just wanted to quickly thank the people that made this presentation possible. So Nite is a game that's a collaboration between what's called the Play Nice Institute and Gameplay Studio, both located here in the Netherlands, if you're interested. The study I ran was conducted with the help of the Dutch StarCraft League. If you're interested in StarCraft, really check them out. And this is all sort of a product of just a lot of thinking and chatting and work done together with our whole gaming team, my supervisors, Isabel and Rutger, and the rest of our gaming group members. Thank you.